Yo, what's up? Another video. We've discussed many times on this channel how there is it's not just bigotry by way of low expectations, which is what a lot of people say. It goes a lot deeper than that. It's more of like complete infantilizing by way of white leftists in particular, where they basically deem every individual that is not white as basically they have a handicap. Because of that, when it comes to being successful, let's say in a more market economy, and they of course do this and present themselves as, look at me. See, I acknowledge this, and therefore I'm a good person, and you're the bad person because you don't acknowledge that. I want to take a look at here, and I guess I'll, so you guys can see it. A guy by the name of Jeremy Wagner is his name. And the one particular tweet that I got tipped on, he says, while I understand why people seek to establish passive income streams and live debt free, just once I'd like to see financial independence Twitter acknowledge that this is not possible for many, and he even specifies it. So for those of you that will probably be like, oh, well, you're just kind of over exaggerating, that's not what he meant. He specifies read non-white people by design. And then he also says, and maybe acknowledge your white privilege and how your upbringing and surroundings gave you a leg up. And it's bizarre because a lot of guys that, for example, I follow on Twitter are like financially independent black people. And they preach that, obviously, among other blacks. And that's not a new thing. Malcolm was doing that. But to act as if it can't be done, or to more so say that, well, that's not a realistic situation or scenario, as he says, because I don't want to misquote him. He says it's not possible for many non-white people by design. And it is very possible. And I'm not saying it's easy, but of course that can be said for generally any race of people. And I'm not one of those guys that gets caught up in this privilege thing. I want you guys to understand how stupid of a concept it is that people bicker and gripe about it, as if we are all individuals. I know everybody, as if we, because of course we are all individuals, but they look as if we, like there'll ever be a society in which every individual, let's say race, is equally represented in every given human affair. It's a completely unrealistic thing, but this is why people talk about over and under representation, and they look at that representation and say, well, that representation exists among black people, therefore, let's say in an underrepresentation, therefore there's something either racist going on or there's a problem there, as if to say that we are all robots, and we're not. Everybody is an individual. They are individuals of preference, and yes, maybe you can find some similarities here and there among, let's say, certain type of, like say, racist or ethnic makeups where they tend to do this as opposed to doing that. But it's not as concrete, and we are individuals at the end of the day. So when people sit here and look at that representation or underrepresentation and find there's something racist going on, it's being dishonest. That doesn't mean that there isn't racism going on. It's just to point to that and say, well, there is something racist going on, or in this case, those individuals can't do it because they are in these, let's say, lower socioeconomic positions. And therefore, it's just not realistic for you to preach that stuff that you're preaching to black people or to non-white people. And it's complete nonsense. And I'm not saying that simply because I'm a successful black man. I grew up in these same unfortunate situations that a lot of these brothers that he probably points to grew up in. Single parent household, didn't have much money. I've been there and did that. I grew up banging, jail, going to jail. I've been there, I did that. So to act like that can't, like that more so concept of financial independence, I would more so argue that it especially applies to those groups, the financial independence Twitter. And yes, a lot of that stuff is hogwash, but that's not more so what he's griping about. He's saying like, well, they're speaking as if it can be done, and they need to understand that there's a privilege that comes with being white, and therefore their message may not resonate or may not necessarily apply to non-white people. And yes, it can. I would argue that it especially applies. Look, certainly culturally, we grow up, and it's not just applying to black people, where they incentivize you to get in debt. That's starting with the higher education system, the public education system, then tries to funnel you to college, as if to say, and I remember hearing all of this, you will not necessarily be successful unless you are going to college. Now, what they don't tend to specify is that there are plenty other things that you can do, and I was not hearing this when I grew up. Plenty of things that you can do to be successful that don't have anything to do with college. There's trades and stuff that you can learn, and quite often people go to college and get very worthless degrees. They get a degree in whatever, going to work in a job, certainly their entry-level job, that has absolutely nothing to do with their degree. And they piled up debt. The government, specifically the federal government, has incentivized this bad behavior, these bad practices, by just giving out whatever loans to these people, to these youngsters that are 18 years of age or older, and that's how they pile up debt. So a lot of the financial independent Twitter will be like, or just individuals will be like, don't go do that, right? Like you're putting yourself all in a hole. And a lot of y'all that watch this video, including myself, took out a loan or two, right? And when it came to college, and because they acted as if that was what you had to do. Now, granted, I was a track and field athlete, and I became more financially taken care of as I got better in the track and field setting. Definitely once I had transferred, but that still took out that initial. I was only on a partial, let's say, scholarship, especially going right out of high school, going to University of Memphis. And if I knew, I always say this, if I knew what I knew now, and let's say I wasn't an athlete, there's no way that I would have went to college. No way. And of course, it's easy to say this in hindsight, but I'm just saying that debt, right, that a lot of youngsters have is a problem, right? And there are things that are being practiced and preached in those communities that we grow up in, and in which they say that you got to go do that, right? You got to go do that, and if you don't do that, you're just going to go be a bum. So this is why you have that big split, right, of people that go off and go to college, and then you got people that go do other stupid stuff and end up dead in jail. There are other options. A lot of folks don't hear about it because a lot of these educational elites, the public school education system pumped this garbage in. I remember vividly, teacher telling me, if you don't go to college, you'll end up doing something like becoming a garbage man. And what she failed to mention was that the garbage man makes more than her. But this sort of infantilizing is the issue that I have with a lot of white leftists, and that they treat black folks as if they are again, infants, and they can't make decisions for themselves. What certain types of things just simply can't apply to them, which is generally good advice for anybody. It just can't apply to them. And what it does is it perpetuates this nonsense that their world cannot move. This is what the Democratic Party does a lot of. Their world cannot move unless some politician, some group of individuals that are already successful move their world for them. And yes, it's not a secret as to why a lot of these folks tend to adopt more socialistic ideas, because they feel like the group owns your kids or owns your offspring or owns you for that matter, and you need that in order to be succeed. It's like be successful. Being independent, definitely financially, doesn't seem to be a thing that they even preach or even value. Or it won't come unless there are other groups or individuals that do it for you. And this is complete garbage. These types exist all around, in which they go around trying to make it seem as if people's world, black people's world specifically, cannot move unless white folk move it for them. Financial independence is a beautiful thing. It is a gorgeous thing. And I would hope, pray, and advocate that a lot of black people, for example, actually, sometimes you got to sort through a lot of the bogusness. But being financially independent, and some of those things can absolutely, a lot of those things, they're going to apply to you just as they would any other race. You just have to actually take the advice. Will it be maybe more difficult depending on what situation that you're in? Of course. But that can be said about anything in any given human affair. But to act like these white folks are necessary to move someone else's world for them in order for to them to become financially independent, because of course they can't be financially independent. It's not get passive incomes and live debt free. Yes, you can be black and get passive income streams and live debt free. You just got to know about it. And generally the public education system isn't going to teach you that. And in those communities, they're rotten as all get out anyway. But hey, you guys are against people choosing what schools they can go to anyway. Nonetheless, please don't be this guy. Don't be this weirdo who sits here and tries to make it seem as if black folks or other races, let's say non-white people, as he made sure that he make that distinction. Acting as if we need these losers, white losers, to assist us. The first tweet he also said, sometimes I see tweets from guys on here like, get a passive income stream, live within your means, which is one of the easiest things that you can do to try to combat, let's say, intergenerational poverty, is living within your means, which sometimes means missing out on a lot of these luxuries that everybody seems to want to take into consideration. But he says, and wonder why we aren't addressing underlying causes of economic inequity, which is always going to be a thing that make financial security increasingly elusive for people. I wonder if he mentions taxation in here. Of course not. Of course not. There's other things that if we do want to talk about in these communities, among others, that actually are issues that make it tough, let's say, to be financially independent regardless of race. You talk about taxation, you talk about licensing laws and all of those that make it essentially illegal for people to become their own, let's say, become entrepreneurs and create for themselves. He doesn't mention any of this in any of this thread, of course. But don't be this guy, a white savior, dude. Like, we don't need your help. Financial independence is a great thing, and yes, a lot of that stuff applies. The problem that, again, I see is that information doesn't even get to them. It's not that they shouldn't listen to it, or it's not realistic for them to live within their means, or they have to collect debt in order to get out of debt, or to get out of the situation. It's bogus. It's just information that they don't take into consideration, either because they don't hear it, or you get weirdos like you. And this is the other side of the equation here, is that there are, unfortunately, a lot of non-white folk that listen to this garbage, and they think that's what has to be done. Well, we can't get out of our situation unless y'all give us money, unless y'all help us, unless y'all assist us. No. So it does go both ways. Don't get me wrong, and that's who he's, of course, trying to appeal to. How I see it, the information is not getting to them. We get the information to those types, and we, of course, want them to actually assess it, digest it, and apply it to their own lives. And you guys, a lot of folks like this, reject it, and you say, well, that stuff can't apply to you because you're black. Like, what type of Don't be this guy, please. Do not be this guy.